Picture a horseman on the plains of 10th century Persia, thundering across open ground at full gallop, then twisting backward in his saddle to fire an arrow at the men chasing him. That maneuver, later called the Parthian shot, only worked because of one small detail hidden under his boot: a raised heel, hooked behind the stirrup, locking his foot in place, while both his hands were busy killing. That wedge of stacked leather was one of the earliest weapons of war disguised as footwear, and it wouldn't be called what it is today until it crossed an ocean of politics and landed, centuries later, on the ankle of a bride walking down an aisle. Because here's the strange truth history nearly erased: the high heel was never invented for women. It was invented for soldiers. For most of human history, shoes were flat, because flat feet made sense. You walked on flat ground, you stood on flat ground, and a raised heel served no purpose at all except to make you unstable. But Persian cavalry archers had a very specific problem. When you're standing up in your stirrups at a full gallop, drawing a bow, your feet want to slide forward and betray you at the worst possible moment. So somewhere around the 9th or 10th century, Persian riders started building up the heels of their boots. That small addition changed everything. It gave the foot a hook, a mechanical anchor, letting a soldier rise, aim, and fire without being thrown from his horse. It wasn't fashion, it was survival equipment, engineered by trial and error on a battlefield. For hundreds of years, this stayed almost entirely a Persian and Central Asian military technology, unknown to most of Europe. Then, in 1599, everything changed with one strange diplomatic gamble. Shah Abbas I of Persia sent an enormous delegation west, hoping to build an alliance with European powers against the Ottoman Empire. Persian riders arrived in courts across the continent, wearing tall boots with those unmistakable stacked heels, and European aristocrats were captivated. These weren't just visitors. They looked powerful, foreign, and dangerously masculine. Men who could dominate a horse in ways European riders couldn't. And European nobility, always hungry to signal wealth and status, decided they wanted that look for themselves. Within a few decades, high heels exploded across the courts of Europe, but stripped almost entirely of their original purpose. Nobody wearing them in Paris or London was standing in stirrups firing arrows backward. They were standing in ballrooms. The heel had been hijacked from its function and repurposed as pure status. Because here's the detail most people miss. A heel makes it nearly impossible to do manual labor, to walk long distances, to work in a field. Wearing one loudly announced that you didn't have to. The higher your heel, the further you stood from anyone who actually worked for a living. No man wore that message louder than King Louis XIV of France. Standing barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, Louis had heels custom-made that added several inches to his height, painted a shocking, unmistakable red on the sole. Those red heels, called talons rouges, became a legal privilege. Only nobility approved by the king himself were permitted to wear them. Showing up at Versailles in red heels wasn't a fashion choice. It was a declaration that you belonged to the innermost circle of French power. Men dueled over honor while balanced on heels 3 or 4 inches tall. And somehow, that just made the whole spectacle more dangerous, more theatrical, and more masculine in the eyes of the court. But this solved one problem for European aristocracy, and quietly created a much stranger one. Because once heels became a symbol of power, women at court wanted access to that same power. And they started wearing heels too, sometimes styled almost identically to men's. For roughly a century, heels weren't gendered at all. Kings and queens, dukes and duchesses, all wore them without much distinction. And that's exactly the moment where you'd expect the story to end. Heels simply belonging to everyone. Except something was already brewing across Europe that would rip men's and women's footwear apart forever. And almost nobody at the time saw it coming. The Enlightenment happened. Suddenly, reason, science, and practicality became the values men were supposed to embody, while ornamentation, decoration, and impracticality became coded as feminine and frivolous. Men, especially in England, abandoned heels almost entirely in favor of flat, sturdy, sensible shoes. Shoes that matched the new masculine ideal of a rational, working man of industry. Women, locked out of that same rational identity by a deeply unequal society, were pushed in the opposite direction, toward fashion that emphasized beauty over usefulness. Heels, once a battlefield tool, then a symbol of aristocratic male dominance, were reassigned almost overnight to the opposite gender. By the time the French Revolution arrived, heels were so tied to aristocracy that wearing them could get you killed. Louis XVI reportedly wore heels to his own execution in 1793. One last defiant flash of the exact symbol that had come to represent everything the revolution hated. So the next time someone tells you high heels were always women's fashion, remember, for the first 600 or 700 years of their existence, they belonged to warriors and kings, not brides and businesswomen. The switch happened almost entirely because of shifting ideas about gender, not because of anything practical about the shoe itself. Now here's where the story gets physical, because the heel that survived into today's world still carries the ghost of that original mechanical trick. A modern high heel does something remarkable to your body with a few simple inches of engineering. Raise the heel, and you tilt the entire skeleton forward, forcing the spine to curve backward to compensate, pushing the chest and hips outward in that posture we now associate with elegance. Meanwhile, the pressure on the ball of your foot can increase by as much as 76% compared to walking barefoot, concentrating your entire body weight onto an area roughly the size of a coin. Your calf muscles shorten over time with regular wear, your Achilles tendon tightens, and your center of gravity shifts forward just enough that your body is in a constant, subtle state of controlled falling, caught only by the next step. It's the exact same principle that locked a Persian archer's foot into his stirrup, an anchor point that changes your balance. Except now, that anchor exists purely for how it makes you look, not how it keeps you alive. And that's the strangest part of this entire story. A design that once meant the difference between staying on your horse and being thrown into enemy territory is now something millions of people strap on for a wedding, a job interview, or a night out, with almost no memory of the war it came from. So next time you see a stiletto heel balanced against a marble floor, ask yourself what other everyday object in your closet started its life as something built to survive a battlefield. Because it's probably not the only one hiding in plain sight.